All right, we might kick off. I think there'll be a few stragglers that walk in the door. And what's fabulous about that is there's only front row seats available. So you can't walk in and just sort of quietly sit at the back. Before I begin proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And where we are today, that's the Warrigal people of the Warrigal Nation. And I'd like to pay my respect and that of Warrigal to elders past, present and emerging. And as you know, with our Aboriginal people, they call their elders elders, and they call them elders because of the respect they show to the oldest people in their tribes and in their communities. And so it's a really lovely, rich word to use, I think, when we're talking about our Aboriginal community, and also to learn from them and how they do respect their elders. I want to begin by thanking David Campbell for coming to speak, and also acknowledging that we've got the chair of the board in green, Wyn Jansen. And a special welcome to you. Thank you. One of our goals of our leadership series, our Leaders Talk series, is to build our individual and unique and collaborative leadership skills. Whether you stay at Warrigal, which we hope you do, or you end up going somewhere else, what you do is you take a backpack of leadership skills, knowledge and wisdom with you. And what it does is make us a better place, and it makes our experience of our customers and clients better when we can show the leadership we want to see in others as well. We have applied the Chatham House rules to our leadership series, and that means you can talk about what happens in the room, you can't ascribe it to anyone, so you can talk about it in general terms. In the last few weeks, we've heard from a couple of leaders about the importance of mentoring, the importance of celebrating skills and strength, and also top tips for maintaining yourself in a busy work life and a busy home life as well. We heard how sometimes the easy decisions aren't the strength of leadership, it's the hard decisions that are. We heard how one of our speakers had to go and vomit in the bathroom after making a decision that he knew was the right one, but it was just so hard to deliver. And they're the important ones to, I think, that end up being the angel on your shoulder that you remember lifelong. It's not actually about the decision, it's how you deploy it and how you communicate that matters. And we heard from our speakers about learning from their clients and colleagues. And now we're going to hear from David, and I'm going to do a bit of a bio on David. We'll probably shake his hand. I had the pleasure of meeting David, I reckon it's about 8.5 years ago now. And I remember the first day I met him too, because it was a job interview for a CEO job, that big fat smile. And I was as nervous as all get out, because David's reputation as being a minister in the New South Wales government preceded him, and I was about to have a job interview with this man, and I was sweating bricks. I think that's the best way to say it. But what I learned about David is that when he sat at that boardroom, once he employed me by the way, he always kept what we called the baby on the boardroom table. So in other words, the client in the room. He always wondered about the voice of the child. He always wondered about the voice of the family. And when we came to the boardroom, it was really, really important that we knew that, we heard that, and it was visible in the boardroom. And that's the same here. That's what we try and engender here in our boardroom here as well. So Big Fat Smile, not only Big Fat Smile, many other organisations across the Illawarra have benefited from David's sage governance leadership. The Housing Trust is one of the other organisations, and I know he's been involved in many others. I think the beauty of what I got from David is, when we were just talking about hard decisions before, he helped me make those hard decisions. He'd work through the thinking of it, and then he'd back me when I deployed it. And sometimes when you're about to make a hard decision, you just need someone to say, I have faith in you, you can do this. And that's what he did for me as a CEO at Big Fat Smile. So David has spent more than 30 years making a real impact in the public service and leadership. He's currently a member of the ISLA board, and he continues to commit to improving healthcare in this region and beyond. His journey in politics started with the Campbell branch of the Australian Labor Party, where he played a hands-on role, and I know that he's still involved to this day. David had many, many years in Parliament, and I went up onto the parliamentary website, and I counted 8 ministerial appointments and 18 key appointments in Parliament. David's influence wasn't limited to government. He also played a really key and pivotal role as director of the University of Wollongong's Innovation Campus. David's always been focused on serving the community, improving services and making a lasting impact. His leadership shows a deep understanding of what community needs to thrive, and his ability to adapt and innovate has made him a key figure in shaping policies. So David will talk to us about his experience in that area. But the other thing, and as we walked in the room, David and I were talking to Melissa, but the other thing that comes with David as he stands in front of you is he's an incredibly proud dad and granddad to Hamish and Ava, and I always tell him what a terrific granddad he is. So I'm going to hand over to you, David, to share your life story.
Thanks, Jenny, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to acknowledge Wynne. Jenny said that we met 8.5 years ago. She was panicking in that room. So was I, because I was a decision maker with others. But also acknowledge Wynne, who, I don't know, Wynne, we probably met each other probably 1984 for the first time, and sort of lost contact over a number of years. But it's great to see you in the room. Acknowledge you all. And join Jenny in acknowledging country and elders past and present, and those people who will come, who will get to work with and make a difference with, is my way of saying emerging elders. I still don't know what I'm going to talk about. Linda approached me to do this, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, and I've been thinking about it on and off and what was the structure, and then I learnt that Robert Fitzgerald spoke to you last week, and I thought, oh, now I'm in trouble. Someone as eminent as him and his experience and his knowledge, and I get to follow him. But the first thing I want to say about leadership is that leadership is the responsibility of all of us, and leadership is shown across the whole gamut of an organisation. So there are people in your organisation today on the floor, on the front desk, who are leaders. Leaders in their own way, leaders amongst their own peers, and that's an important recognition for us, I think. Often organisations see senior management as leaders or the board as leaders. They are, and they have the strategic leadership role, but then there's that service delivery role at the front line, which requires leadership as well. And one of the ways that I guess I learnt that was as a local member of Parliament, a member for Kira, going around and visiting schools. And, always important to talk to the principal, always important to talk to the kids, but it was a person on the front desk who was the most important person to talk to, because they control what the flow of information is. They are the first line of contact, and that was a lesson that I learnt all those years ago. My first elected leadership role was in 1973, which scares me. It was a time when the public education system in New South Wales implemented school councils, student councils, and I was elected to the first one at Corrimal High School by my peers in what was then fourth form, and which was my last year at school. And there were some vital And that, I guess, that experience set me on a journey of having an interest in community involvement, community engagement, community representation, and subsequently into elected office. My first foray into elected office, and therefore that sense of community leadership, was in 1987 when I was elected an alderman, as people were then now known as councillors, on Wollongong City Council. But before that, I'd been appointed by the New South Wales government in 1986 to the first Illawarra Area Health Service, the first foray into trying to get that. It was a political appointment. I was up and coming member of the Labor Party. Government were looking for young people in the regions, and I make no excuse for that. I was at that time not quite 30, and so was considered young enough to be a young person to represent the community in that forum. Only lasted about 3 months after a change of government in '88 when the Greiner government got rid of all the Labor appointments, but that's the way it works as well. But '87 I was elected to Wollongong City Council. Brash young person at about 30 years of age and 1 month, and took it on. Remember, I went to the first council meeting, some guy who'd been there forever. I sat in his seat, and he came in and he said, "That's where I sit." I said, "It's not anymore, it's where I'm sitting." And that set the tone, which was a bit belligerent in many ways, but also it meant that the longer serving people knew that I was going to do something different. And from that position, which, if you like, was in opposition, a lot of people say there shouldn't be party politics and us and them in local government, but let me tell you, the most ferocious political opponent I ever had was a so-called independent who hated party politics in local government, a woman called Pat Franks. Some may or may not have heard of her, but from that position of opposition, the first year we got a budget on a Friday night, about a week before Christmas, this thick, printed document, with, no, it didn't come Friday night, it came lunchtime Saturday, and the meeting was Monday night at 5 o'clock. We were supposed to vote on this. So we had no strategy, there was no strategic plan for the council, there was no statement of values, there was just a reliance on tradition, what had happened, and the Local Government Act. And so I convinced my Labor colleagues, who we were in a minority, that we should defer this on the Monday night because no one could have read it. No one could possibly have understood the implication of this document. Those who'd been there a long time and had the numbers said, no, we've read it all word for word over the weekend, and we endorsed it. So that was in December. I was lucky enough to be in the surf at Taronji on a Sunday in early February, and a guy paddled up to me, someone who I knew, who worked at the council, who worked in the finance branch. He said, "You know that budget's a crock of," I'll leave you to put the other word in. And as we were paddling around, just body surfing, he started to explain what was wrong. And that led me to the journey of really questioning from those roles. I went to council meetings, no I didn't, I tell a lie. I leaked to the Mercury on that Sunday afternoon that there was a problem, and that was a front page the next day, and all hell broke loose. So we got the auditors in, and the budget was a crock, and we fixed it. But that was an opportunity to understand that you've got a question in a leadership role. You have to push and not necessarily take the first answer, and that you have to stand up. As a consequence of that, we got the auditors in. Again, I didn't quite know what I was doing, but I said, "Well, you reckon it's all right, I reckon it's wrong. Let's get our auditors in to give us a look at it." And they gave a scathing report. The money had been stolen out of trust funds to prop it up, and not stolen, but misallocated out of trust funds to prop it up. So that's an early lesson as a brash young person, and over the years I've sort of tamed myself a little bit, I guess, and not been as arrogant or presumptive, but certainly understanding that that's a role. Not all my decisions have been that easy in public life. As Jenny said, there are decisions that you make that you know are the right ones. They sometimes do go against your personal values and your personal views. But over the years I've had to close down services because they just didn't cut the mustard. They weren't paying their way. They weren't providing the result that they should be, and that's a particular challenge. A big fat smile. We closed. We closed a children's play area. We closed the art project, which were all great and all about doing the right thing, but couldn't get there. And I've always said to my teams, I might say that in my leadership roles, I've always sought to put people around me who I believe are smarter than I am. They do the hard work, make me look good when you get further up your tree, and that's what happens. That's what happens here. You will do the hard work to make Jenny look okay. She does a bit of hard work to make Wynn look okay. That's how it works. But I've always looked for people around me who were smarter than me, and as a consequence of that, you get the opportunity to make some very positive decisions as well. Fast forwarding a long way, I had the opportunity to resurrect electronic ticketing in the New South Wales transport system, what we now know as the Opal card. Government had sought to implement a contactless, cashless ticketing system, spent a decade and about $2.5 billion for a failure. Then we spent 3 years of my predecessor as Transport Minister saying, I'm not touching that, it's too hard, privately, not publicly. Oh yes, we're working on it. Anyway, I jumped in and I said, no, we're going to fix this. And so went and talked to people, why did the other one work? Why did it fail? Why did we spend all that money? And it was because people tried to write a bespoke system. I don't know who remembers going to a railway station and there used to be this box of tickets on the wall. If you were going from Woonona to Wollongong, there was a ticket that someone picked out from there. If you were going from Wollongong to Sutherland, there was a ticket that someone picked out from there. And all of those had a different fare. And so it was totally complicated, totally manual. And the system the government tried to put in place was that we would take that ticket and put it in an electronic system. Just didn't work. So anyway, we ended up, I was fortunate enough to sign the contract that became the Opal card. Subsequently, there's a change of government and a new government introduced it. That's how the system works. I'm happy with that. I know in my own mind that we did the hard work. But I did that by having smart people around me, identifying why the initial one didn't work, gathering our information, and then identifying the people in Treasury who caused the problem the first time. I'm sorry if there's finance people here saying... I mean, government central agencies control the joint. Let me tell you, the Premier's Department and Treasury control the joint. I always feel sorry when I see a portfolio minister struggling to explain why they've had a hard decision or why you can't do that, because I know that over there, the bean counters or other policy people have said you can't do it. All for good reason. But we went around and we identified who the blockages were, who had moved on and who the new people were. We identified the people in other ministers' offices as to who we could get on side. And so we spent a good 9 months lobbying behind the scenes before we went to Cabinet, to the Budget Committee Cabinet with our submission, which sailed through because we'd done our homework. And I'm giving that example because my experience again of leadership is that you've got to identify who are the influencers of a decision that you want as well and bring them into your tent. And that to me is a success. Little anecdote to the end, I saw Gladys Berejiklian, who became the Transport Minister after the change of government, and she introduced or commissioned the Opal card. I saw her about 6 weeks later and I said, "Oh, Gladys, that's great that you've introduced my Opal card." She didn't see the cynicism in it at all. It was a very fraught conversation, but subsequently we came to have a chat. She'd been my Shadow Minister for Transport and we didn't get on, but and that was pure politics as well. I always reckon they're after my job, I'm not going to give them much help. So, another experience I want to talk about is getting cabinet approval to introduce a desalination plant, which had been on again, off again. Just before the 2003 election, I became the Minister for Water Utilities. I don't know who remembers, I do, because I had nightmares about it. 2003, one of the worst droughts we ever had. Warrigal Dam, main water supply source of the city, was at 17% capacity. I noticed the other day it was spilling, so it's at more than 100% capacity. So I had a screensaver on my computer as the bomb rain forecasting site. And just willing it to rain, and it didn't do a lot for my mental health, I've got to tell you. So there was so much community opposition to this notion of introducing a desalination plant, and others had balked at it, but then suddenly I became the minister in about September. And the election was in March and Sydney's running out of water. So I was in that context, in that mix. The opposition was offering treated sewage to be shandied into the water supply, which I know it's again on the agenda of Sydney Water. And so there was this distinct policy view, but the community didn't want either. They just wanted water from somewhere. They wanted government to make sure water was being provided. Government's role, you get that, but if it doesn't rain, you don't have it. And so I said to my team, we have to go out and back this. We have to find a way to go to Cabinet and get it endorsed. But I said, it's my view of this sort of stuff, this really difficult public policy stuff, is if you're a minister, a leader in the government, you've got to go out on a limb. But don't go out that far that when they start chopping it off, you can't get back. And that will be the case in your view. You will want to do change. You'll want to do something exciting, innovative. And I note that the company's values permit you to do that and encourage you to do that. But do it in a collaborative way. Do it in a way that if you're out there on the limb, you can get back in time before it's a problem. And the other thing that I always say to my teams is, if we're going to do something new, that's great. Let's gather our facts, be confident that we've got it right. But if it doesn't work, fail early. Don't keep propping it up. Don't keep propping it up. Cut it off and say it's not what we thought. So we've got to do something different. My view has always been that as a leader of a team, take ownership of problems. Put your hand up, and I always said to my staff, if you're going to make a mistake, put your hand up, tell me what the mistake is, and then let's work through and fix it, and then let's move on. I'm not going to, if someone's had a go, I'm not going to, as long as they've complied with the law and with policy and that sort of stuff, if they had a go, I'm not going to spear them. I did that with my public servants. There were people who called for me to sack public servants, and I said, no, this is a fair dinkum attempt to do something good, and we're not going to hang them out to dry. And my maxim for that is, it's not the stuff up that gets you, it's the cover up. You look at any of those reporting about what's going on at ICAC. If someone had spoken up, if someone had fixed it earlier, it is a cover up that brings those people undone. And that, I think, is another lesson that I've learned along this journey. I've talked about some of my publicly elected roles on the City Council and as a minister and as a local member. But all of those same principles I brought to roles in appointments in the Port Corporation, on the Council of the University of Wollongong, in my current role in health. You see an interaction with health every day in your important part, I was going to say small part, of the health system, in the fact that our society can't get old people out of critical care beds into aged care in a timely way, and that's a criticism of the system. It's not a criticism in any way of Warrigal. In fact, the board of ISLD is often reminded as to the cooperation that the health system gets from Warrigal. Jenny and Craig came and spoke to the board at a strategy session about December, something like that. And but it's now I've lost totally the train of thought where I was going there. All those same principles from operating in government, I've applied in other non-government, non-elected roles, to varying degrees of, as I said earlier, aggression, bombast. But sometimes you got to stand up for really what you believe in. There is, as I said earlier, though, a responsibility on all of us to acknowledge that leadership is across an organisation, and that the way that any of us can be a valuable leader and add value to our organisation or to our role is to listen. And that's, again, a lesson I learned early. Listening doesn't necessarily mean agreeing with everything everyone tells you. I got to tell you, if you were a councillor or an alderman on a local government authority and you tried to please everybody all of the time, you would do your head in. It took me about 6 weeks to realise I couldn't do that in September, October 87. But listening is important, and it means that you can then filter out different points of view. Not everybody has all of the answers to every clue, and for me, listening to front line in organisations has been of huge benefit in my decision making. Again, an anecdote. As Lord Mayor of Wollongong, I instituted a circumstance where the General Manager and I would go to various depots and talk to groups of staff, rather than get everybody from the organisation in one place, which was nearly impossible. So over about 3 weeks, I'd be at the Central Depot at Ferry Meadow at 6:30, and then a couple of days later at Unadera at 6:30, talking to groups of people. And this group of guys approached me out at Central Depot one day, and afterwards they wanted a bit more of a private chat. And they were tractor mower operators, and they had these vehicles at the time which had quite a high cab. And they started to talk to me about how they felt unsafe. They felt that when they're mowing a bank or something, that the vehicle might topple over because it's so top heavy. They knew it wasn't going to, but they were concerned. And so I listened to them and I said, okay. I said, but who amongst you did the test drive? I'm buying a car, I'm going for a test drive. No, we just get what we're given. So I went back into town, called up the city engineer, and I said, hang on, these guys don't get to test drive it. I said, I'm not saying they get to make the decision, but surely we get them. He said, oh no, we just send someone to the field days and they have a look at what's around and then we buy them. I said, well, that's changing from now. I said, one or two of these guys will go with whoever we send to those field days and they will test drive them. He said, oh, we've never done that before. I said, yeah. I said, I've never been the Lord Mayor before. But I said, that's what we're doing from now. He said, I'm not sure he can. I said, well, there's a couple of ways we can deal with this. You can come back Monday or you can not come back Monday. The guys got to do their test drive. But the important thing is that productivity of that group of people went through the roof when they had equipment that they were comfortable with, and they knew that they had an input into. And again, I'm trying to just make that point that leadership comes from within, and the higher up the tree you are, the more you've got to find a way to get down to listen to people at the lower level. Not to interfere with the way the place is managed, although I just gave you a demonstration how I did, but not to interfere on a day-to-day basis, but to understand the strategy, understand the implications, but also to recognise that the people who work in an organisation are the people who make it productive, who get the results, who, in your context, provide the housing, provide the care, and if they feel valued, then the organisation is stronger. And I tried to do that in a whole range of ways, across a whole range of roles that I've had. The thing I was going to say when I started this discussion, I said earlier, known I was coming for about 6 weeks, thought about it. I know I dreamt about it last night or this morning, and I still wasn't quite sure. But the thing that I wanted to say was that what I want to do before I shut up is to make it clear, or I was going to make it clear at the start, that I want you to ask me questions, because that's another thing that I've learned and another thing that I've brought to the roles that I've got. Get people to question me. If I'm questioning them about what they're doing, they should question me about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and on what basis I'm doing it. And so that's what I certainly wanted to make clear earlier, but it's a good segue out of having said that I've gone and listened to people and had them question me. I haven't a clue how long I've prattled on for. Probably not quite long enough, but I'm getting a nod that I'm going okay. But for time, that is. I've got a couple of nods and a couple of chuckles, so that tells me I'm reading the room mostly okay. Different aspects of what I've said have had different reactions in different parts of the room, and that tells me that there's a diverse view in this group of people that I'm talking to, and that's got to be a valuable thing as well. I could regale you with anecdotes of challenging decisions in public life, and there are some that are absolute gems in my view. Had to fight to introduce yellow lidded bins in Wollongong in the early 90s, and now look at where we are with recycling. Not necessarily my idea, but an idea that others put to me that we worked up and we got up. I had one of the biggest blues I ever had with the management at Wollongong Council was trying to get a couple of cadetships. So we had 10 or 12 cadetships a year across a range of disciplines, engineering, finance and what have you. One of the biggest fights I had, I said I want to allocate 2 of those roles, and again this is in the early 90s, I want to allocate 2 of those roles for Aboriginal people. I would now say Indigenous, but at the time it was Aboriginal. Well, the white male managers at Wollongong Council weren't having a bar of that, but again I just kept chipping away, winning and finding other ways to demonstrate the importance of that, and eventually I won. There were no "Don't Come Monday" moments in that discussion, but it took a bit longer. But eventually I won, and so I took that as a great achievement. I was really excited. And we started then to consult with the Aboriginal community as to what disciplines. And they wanted welfare workers. And I came very paternalistic and I said, I'm not giving you welfare workers. Which goes against the grain of what I was saying about consultation and listening and all that sort of stuff. But I said, if we look at your organisations, again, I'm talking the early 90s, mid-90s. If we look at your organisations, they are failing through a lack of management skills. You know, being blunt with you, your organisations are being ripped off by people. the bookkeepers / accountants that you're putting in don't have the skills, and look, you know, we can see them buying their own cars with your money. It was hard. It was hard conversations to have, but in the end we agreed that we would compromise. We would have a welfare / community worker, and we would have a broad-based administrative role. And then we went about and we found, again, a bit paternalistically, a bit against you know, sort of employment practice even at that time, but we handpicked people to put in those roles so that they would be successful. The admin person now is about to retire, but has had senior roles in a whole range of Indigenous organisations, and I'm quite proud of the fact that that happened. So if you're listening to your people, if you're observing what's happening in the community, and if you're working with others, there's a whole range of ways that you can make a difference, a whole range of ways that you can improve the strength of not only your organisation, but others. As Jenny said, you know, hopefully you're all staying here for the long haul, but if there's an opportunity that opens up elsewhere, the skills that you've learned off each other will, you know, can influence other organisations along the way. Again, I can go on and I might give you some other anecdotes if there are some questions, but I think I might leave it at that and take questions, and hopefully there are lots of them, because again, my experience is the questioning process is what brings out the real information that people need to know, people want to hear, rather than what I think I want to tell you. So thanks for listening, and please hit me with some really good questions. And don't be shy.
David, I've got one question. Was there somebody through your career who you really admired and who was your mentor, or somebody that kind of stand out and somebody that you could rely on to speak to?
Well, there are many, I've got to say. So who I subsequently mentored, is that what you mean?
No, someone that mentored you.
Oh, mentored me.
Yeah.
A guy called Laurie Kelly, who was previously a state member and was a speaker in the parliament, but at the local level, I knew him personally, and he mentored me. A couple of my parents' friends my parents were never politically involved, but a couple of their friends were, and they took me under their wing when I first joined the Labor Party back in about 1976. So I'm a political product of the Whitlam sacking, I'm proudly tell people. So there's a couple of old guys there. When I went to the Parliament, the then Treasurer, Michael Egan, was really good. Egan dragged all the first-time ministers. So I went to Parliament in 1999 and became Minister in 2003. So April 2003, Egan, after the swearing, you've seen all that stuff at Government House where the Governor swears in, we were dragged back, the new ministers were dragged back, and Egan gave us a bit of a summary of what it's like to be a cabinet minister, and you know, my door was always open, and I went and knocked on his door many times. But the thing that he told us all was, he said, for the next 6 months, you will ask yourself every day, what the have I done? I'll leave you to work out what that word was, rough and tumble of politics. And you know what? He was absolutely right. For the next 6 months, I asked myself, what have I done? Why am I here? What's going on? But after that, you get into the rhythm of things. And I think that's probably true of any senior role that you take on. You know, there's a lot to learn, a lot of people to get to know, and new jargon. And again, it's probably a question I ask myself after every portfolio change. Firstly, I had regional development and small business and the Illawarra. Then I had water utilities, I mentioned earlier, added to that. Another minister resigned, a guy called Carl Scully, who was also a real mentor for me, a really good friend. And so it was really painful when he was sacked and I got part of his portfolio. So again, you take on that new portfolio and you have to build on it. Subsequently, I became Minister for Police. I tell you what, I haven't given you any anecdotes of that, but that's a steep learning curve, very steep learning curve. And then I was given transport and subsequently transport and roads together. So that first 6 months, there's a whole new group of people you've got to meet. All the acronyms you've got to get on top of. And I tell people all the time, tell me what the acronym means, because it's your language, you speak it, but I don't know it. So you've got to get on top of the acronyms, and you've got to get on top of the business. You know, what is it that we do? It's easy to say, oh yeah, police minister. It was an exciting time. I loved it. Had to put up with the chasers at APEC. I don't know who remembers that. So I had to go out and say what a great job the police force were doing when they just let these faux Arabic people sort of inside the cordon. You know, Jenny talked about those hard decisions that you've got to make that make you sick. That was one of them. I wanted to go and laugh with everybody else. And we did in the office, you know. But it's this sense of having to convey confidence. Someone who was in my office at the time, Ryan Park, the now Minister for Health, about 4 months ago did an interview with Craig Rucastle, and it was about the time of APEC, that APEC would have been on it, so they had a chuckle because Rucastle was one of the chasers at the time, and he's now the morning presenter on ABC Sydney. So they had a bit of a chuckle, and that was pretty exciting for me to hear that all this distance and all these years later. But yeah, there's some of the mentors. I mean, Car was brilliant. Car, in terms of encouraging people, I've tried to learn from him and Egan and Scully, and when new people came into the Parliament when I was there, I would go and say to them, you know, my door's open, come and talk to me about procedure, come and talk to me about what those damn bells mean when they're ringing all the time, and you know, all that sort of stuff. It's a matter of passing on to people your experience. Who mentored me? Who have I mentored? I'll go on with. I talked about Ryan. He was came to my office as a relatively junior policy person. Subsequently became my chief of staff, and is now the Minister for Health. Paul Scully, the planning minister, worked briefly in my ministerial office. A guy who you might have heard of after the federal election, a guy called Ed Husick, was my chief of staff. And I've got people scattered all over the place, I've got to tell you, who used to work for me, and I'm very proud of them. A woman is head of corporate relations at the Fred Hollows Foundation, for example, and the list goes on and on. Another guy now is head of corporate relations at Football Australia. So I keep telling him, what about those freebies? Thanks for the question.
Good question. Just quickly, we're in a sector that's on the cusp of some significant change, and in many sort of facets to the organisation. So how do you build and lead through in times of significant change when you are often shifting on long-held ways of doing things and trying to bring people along?
Yeah. And often the change, you know, isn't necessarily for the best. You just got to grab hold of it, because the decision makers have made that, and there'll be parts of it that you think are brilliant, parts of it you think are a crock, but keep an eye on the crock so that there's an opportunity to give feedback for tweaking. But on the way through, it's grab hold of it because it is what it is, make the most of it, but talk it out. And where you're frustrated by it, and you will be, don't do this. Talk to them. Talk to that person over there and say, this is so frustrating, and it's not quite working, but how can we make it work? I'm a bit of a dinosaur, and I accept work from home is now pretty entrenched and important. But what I reckon that if everyone works from home all the time, we miss out on is the tea trolley chat, the corridor chat, where that sort of thing that's really difficult just gets mentioned in passing, you get it off your mind, someone else then comes back later and says, why don't you try this? And so it's a matter of communication, in my view. Communicating with your clients, and your clients aren't necessarily Warrigal's customers. There are different pillars, and you have clients across that way. So it's important that you communicate with them why you're making this change. It's mandated. Yes, it's going to impact you over there, but how do we make sure that that impact is in the best interests of the organisation, of the people we serve, but also how's in the best interests of my own head and your head, so you're not going home frustrated at that sort of thing. It can only be through communication. But the other thing I would say is, don't dig in and say, I don't like this, I'm not going to do it. Because it's going to happen one way or the other, and better to have it happen on your terms and what works for your organisation rather than cause a huge problem. Hopefully that helps.
Question.
Yep.
With all your experience in the leadership roles, what was the main thing that used to keep you awake at night? And how did you get past it?
There was a period when the name Alan Jones or Ray Headley would keep you awake. But after a while I came to realise if you went into their studio, they were much softer on you. And after a while I came to realise that they really weren't making a difference electorally. They were making a lot of noise, but they weren't making a difference electorally, which is a KPI for a minister, you know, make sure you get your stuff. So that's the flippant answer. But the stuff that kept me awake at night, nothing generally, but the specific project we were working on, the specific challenge of that day or that week, which was often intense. As Roads Minister, there had been a truck failure on the F3, and people were camped in their car for nearly 36 hours. I did a stand-up media conference in Sydney before question time, 4 days in a row. That went for an hour and a half. And each of those nights kept me awake trying to work out what to do. Eventually we stood aside the chief executive of the organisation, because Roads had had a similar event about 5 years before, and there'd been all these crossovers. I don't know if you've noticed, if you're on the F3, there's these crossovers, but Roads never implemented it. So that, well, the crossover means that if there's a hold up on northbound or southbound, you can move those lanes to 1 or 2 and then cross over from the other direction and have this bi-directional. So that was a particular one. The water one was months and months. Again, just because you know that the community is so reliant on water, and you know, we'd done as much as we could with restrictions. We'd put in water tanks. I live in a townhouse, and I did at that time. I had no intention, no need for a water tank. But as a water minister, I thought, I better put a water tank in. I'm pleased I did, because the Telegraph ended up hanging over the back fence and taking photos. They thought they had me. So that sort of stuff, but sort of more generally, not really. You know, you're sort of leading up to an election, you're worried, and it wasn't so much for myself. I always wanted to win an election because that was my job, and I got a great deal of satisfaction out of every role I've had, personal satisfaction. And but you would worry about what might happen to your staff if you didn't get the job. So that was an issue over the election period, more so than my own role, but but I just made the point, I got a lot of self-satisfaction out of all of the roles. A couple of years ago, I went to buy a new car. I rocked up at the VW dealership in Wollongong, and the young salesman said, "I know you, we've got your photo on our mantelpiece at home." I was like, "What?" "Oh, okay, what's that about?" He said, "You made my mum and dad Australian citizens when you were the Lord Mayor, and they are so proud to be Australian citizens that they continue that." And that sort of feedback, just, gladdens your heart. I got no idea who they were. Like, over 8 years as a Lord Mayor, I tried to do the maths once, a citizenship ceremony a week with 40 or 50 people, and then Australia Day 100. I got no idea how many people, but that one family remembers that with pride, and that filled my heart, And people stop me in the street all the time and say, "Do you remember when you sorted that problem out for us?" To be honest, no, I don't. I could say, "Oh, yeah," and then I'll get caught up, but just that sense of honesty and transparency has always been important to me. And then they'll go on and explain what the issue was, and sometimes I remember, sometimes I won't. So there's more of that stuff than staying awake at night, I guess. One thing to add on to that, I've talked about communication a bit. Things have changed because we now have this thing called emails. We're so prevalent in my time in public office. But anyone who ever wrote to me in writing, from when I was first elected an alderman in 87 to when I got out of the Parliament in 2011, no one who wrote to me as a local member in writing can say they did not get a reply. Not necessarily the reply they wanted. There was one guy who I still see in the street occasionally who used to get a response that said, "I have received your latest piece of correspondence, full stop. Yours sincerely." Not many of those, but some. But he can't say he didn't get a response, didn't get a reply. Much harder now with email because I know that elected members get emails from across the state and across the country for things they have no influence over and that sort of stuff. But back to my point about working across here in organisations, if someone gives you a shout out, it's important to give them a response and have that engagement. And back to your point. So wandered a little from what keeps you awake at night, but a lot of stuff keeps you awake because you're quite chuffed with what you did. Yep. Craig.
Thanks for your presentation. I subscribe to the theory, by the way, about having people around you that are smarter than you.
Oh, sorry, I have to come over here. I can't. Can you start again?
I subscribe to your theory about having people in your team that are smarter than you. I'm not sure Jenny has that same. You've seen and worked with a lot of leaders over your time. I guess I'm just interested in, do you believe leadership is inherent or developed skills, and does one of those make a better leader than the other?
Yeah. You read my mind, Craig. That was one of the things I thought about this morning. I never did a degree, an undergraduate degree. I did a master's degree when I got out of the Parliament. For a whole range of reasons, I didn't have that opportunity. And I did a unit on leadership for my master's. And of course, there's all this theory about leaders are born and then as leaders are made, put them together and that's what happens. There's something in some people's personality that drives them in that direction. There's learned experiences just from what they've done in the workplace or in a sporting team or a social group, and there's study about this stuff. So I think it's a combination of all of that, and certainly in my experience, the people, the really strong leaders that I've been able and very fortunate to engage with, people like Keating, Egan, Carr, Yemma, Christina Keneally, and I wouldn't say that they had one thing over another. They were quite rounded people, really, when you know them. Keating particularly would, you would, if those of you who can remember him as the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, would have the view that, as this total tough, arrogant person, very intelligent, very smart, but very down to earth as well. Carr the same, although neither of them had much interest in sport. But I would say it's a mixture of all of that, and somewhat comes down to your experience and the opportunities you've had to engage and develop any natural leadership you might have, and then any formal training that you might have had, you can bring to that as well. Bit convoluted, mate, but my experience is not one or the other. Yep.
Going back to the desal plan, you would have had huge opposition within your own team about the idea of getting it. How did you work through those little challenges and win everybody and bring them along the journey? Because at the end of the day, you all had to stand up there and have smiling faces and nodding heads in the background. But and we all know that we've come across those situations. But how did you do that at the time? Because that was one of the biggest changes of water for New South Wales.
Sure. So the team that stood up were all cabinet members or senior public servants. So they're in the tent. Some of the other ministers might not have been, but if you want to stay in cabinet, it's called cabinet solidarity. In terms of the backbench, if you like, you just got to go off and pick off people. It sounds dreadful, but there are those people over there who you're never going to convince, always going to be opposed, and that's their view, that's what they've read, that's what they want. Then there are some in the middle who, maybe, maybe not. And there are some who are opposed, but quite softly, so you go in and explain to them, communicate with them, talk to them, give them the info, put them in front of the specialist public servants. But at the end of the day, as Jenny said and I've said, there are hard decisions you've got to make and you can't keep everybody happy. So you spend time just trying to woo who you can, soften others so they won't be as vociferous. And I've talked about that process within the government. There's also that process a little with the opposition, but there's also that process with the community. And mostly at that level, it's through community organisations. You go through a process of community consultation, but it's not possible to, as I said, pick off everybody in the community. But it's a bit like herding cats in some ways. You just got to keep talking. But there comes a point where you're out on that limb and you say, it ain't going to break behind me so I can make that decision. And that's true of all of us. It's true in our private life, it's true in your work life, it's true in that sporting club that you're in. Someone's got to make a decision at a point in time and then own that decision. And I've done that many times over the years. You gather your facts, talk to people, tweak what your position is as a response to what you've heard and what you've learnt. Compromise and pragmatism comes into it on occasion. But once you make a decision, you've got to know that you've got people around you who will back you when you go out, and always know there are going to be people who are going to be upset. But always with those people, try not to burn your bridges either. I've made decisions and those who didn't like them have thrown all sorts of things at me. But you just take it on the chest. It hurts, but you take it on the chest because you've made what you believe is the best decision. Occasionally you stuff that up and you've got to change it. We're all human, and again, own that. But the best way I've ever seen someone put down an opponent like that was Carl Scully. He and I and the editor of the Illawarra Mercury were having coffee in the main street of Thurrool. It was about the time of the Seacliff Bridge and all that sort of stuff. And a local activist came up and launched a torrent of abuse at Carl and I. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, this is like... Carl says, does that make you feel better? She just wandered off. Lesson learned. It was just fantastic. And the editor of the Mercury said, what was that about? I said, mate, you don't get it. We cop that all the time. This was over the top, but we cop that sort of complaint, antagonism all the time. And so it was a great lesson for the editor of the Mercury, but the best put down I've ever seen. No argument, just, does that make you feel better? And they just wandered off. Totally deflated. And we ended up having our coffee and having a chat. So, and your second question?
Second question is, what have you found the biggest challenge moving from public sector life to private sector life, and how have you handled that transition?
Because it was my decision, I guess, it's easier, and I've been fortunate that I've been able to pick up some work to do. I know other members who were defeated at the 2011 election expecting to win, and they are, whatever we are, 14, 15 years on, still shattered. And I feel sorry for them. I engage with them quite frequently, give them a ring and have a chat. But from my perspective, I knew it was time. I'd been in elected office for 24 years and spent another 5 or 6 trying to get there. So I'd had 30 years of 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. And so I knew it was time, but I also set myself the goal of finding some other things to do without necessarily a full-time gig. As it turned out, I was offered a position by the university to be the director of the innovation campus, and I did that for 2.5 years. Then went off to support my wife through a terminal illness. But I also used that as a bridge. So that wasn't full-time, it was only 4 days a week. I used that as a bridge to get a couple of local not-for-profit board roles and some other stuff. So for me, I've again sought to use those skills and those experiences to continue to contribute, but in a lesser way. It gives me time to spend a deal of time exploring the internet as to where an overseas trip might take me. And just back from Sri Lanka, and I'm going to Italy and Malta later in the year. So it's, again, it's about engagement. And, I'm still relatively young in this whole experience, I guess, and it's still my late 60s. And I reckon I've got 20 years to go. I'm not looking forward to 30 and turning 100. I don't see the value in that, but if it happens, it happens. But and one of the ways that's important to me to do that is to stay engaged intellectually, grab these opportunities when they come along, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for the chuckles and the nods and the body language in the room, and maintain some physical fitness. So the other thing is that from a political perspective, it's great to look at what's going on behind, what I interpret as going on behind the scenes as opposed to what I see in the media, and having had that experience. And I'm fortunate enough to stay in touch with some current members who I wouldn't say I mentor, but I chat with, I have a coffee with, and they know they can download in a code of silence. Very lonely jobs up there. You say the wrong thing at someone's birthday party, next thing it's in the media. So, there's 3 or 4 current ministers, I guess, who give me a shout out and say, "You up for a coffee?" And yep, absolutely. First thing is they buy it, and the second is I get a bit of local gossip, bit of what's going on in the government. And that's always so. all these things, there's stuff you put in, but there's stuff you get out, and I think that's an opportunity for me to finish on leadership. Put it in, but take out for yourself as well, not in a selfish way, but learn from it and grow from it and be satisfied by it. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, David. That was a great way to end. Talk about give, but you also get something back in return on that. And I'm sure everyone here really appreciates the fact that you've shared your wealth of leadership experience over many, many years and over a lot of different industries and activities. You made me feel a little bit old because you mentioned that in 1973 you were on the council at Corrimal High School. That was the year Roberta and I were married. And we did meet a number of times, and I've had an experience in that originally I was a very young person on the Camden Hospital Board, which eventually was merged into the Macarthur Area Health Board. And after that, like you, I was also removed from that particular role. So I have a bit of experience on the health side there as well.
It's a small world.
It is small. We talked about leadership and what are the traits of leadership and that, and I think sometimes we get confused by charismatic characters, and there are some charismatic leaders who are excellent and wonderful, and I can name a few. There are also some that don't quite do that, and I guess leadership is a question of whether there's a good motive for it or whether it's a self-motive for leadership. And the ambition alone does not make a very good leader. I do want to thank you for selecting Jenny for Big Fat Smile, because that meant that she was at least in the Illawarra, and she got to meet some of us from Warrigal and that during that period of time as well, and we're just so thankful that when the opportunity came, she also joined us and became our leader, and it's brought a wonderful leadership team together. And again, I said it last Friday, and I think again at this room today, and it's a wonderful leadership team that Warrigal have got. And we are a not-for-profit, originally based on volunteerism. Now clearly volunteerism won't carry the whole organisation, but 513 volunteers does make a big difference to our organisation. So I don't want to carry on much longer. I do want to just thank you for all those experiences you've given, and also your commitment to the community. I do remember when you first became Lord Mayor as well, and that must have been a bit of a challenge to be there. And I will say that I saw you grow in that role. And I'm sure you'll admit that when you were first there, you were most probably a little bit raw, and we all grow into those roles as people support you. And I think we do have to have a vision. And I just finished reading a book on Johan Utzon and about him being removed from the Opera House project. And there was a guy called Joe Carl who had a vision. I don't think he really understood too much about all the finances and that it was going to go on and that, but he had the vision, and he went ahead with a radical design. Originally, I think the budget was £3.5 million or $7 million in today's currency, and I think eventually it became 100 million or something like that, all financed through an Opera House lottery. Not a cent from the coffers of the state government and that. So there's vision that we have, and you do have to make sometimes hard decisions. We made a hard decision. We had to close Warrigal, and that's a hard decision. It's been there for a long time. We also have a vision to improve that site and to provide alternative type of accommodation. We had a vision that we were going to build something at Shell Cove. And thankfully, the state government gave us a $17 million grant that allowed us to also build the home as well as the village at the one time. And that's been a wonderful addition to our organisation. So this is where you people come together, you provide the vision to the board. I'm very pleased that we got a 98% response to the voice survey. the beauty about 98% response is that most people gave some opinion. Not all of those opinions we would agree with, but there's a heck of a lot of good suggestions that we're going to take on board, and we're going to work with you to make this organisation even better. So that's enough about me and Warrigal. It's about David, thanking him for his contribution to our discussions on leadership. And once again, thank you very much, David.
Thank you.